A city grid can be a secret map of the stars. For thousands of years, our greatest urban centers were not just built for living, they were designed as perfect mirrors of the cosmos, crafted by visionaries whose names have vanished from history. By the end of this, you will gain the ability to look at any ancient city and see the hidden astronomical code written in its streets. We will uncover why a Mexican pyramid complex points to a specific star cluster, and how a Greek oracle site was engineered as a celestial amplifier. What does it mean for a civilization to build its home as a reflection of the heavens? The architect stands on a windswept hill, his tools not parchment and ink, but a polished bronze sextant and star charts etched on clay. He is not just planning a city, he is translating the heavens. This is the essence of urban design, a forgotten cornerstone of ancient engineering. It is the deliberate, precise practice of aligning a city's entire layout, its main avenues, its grandest temples, with the eternal movements of the cosmos. We are talking about the path of the sun on the longest and shortest days, the rising of the moon at its most extreme points, and the fixed positions of key star groups. This was far more than symbolic decoration. For these early planners, it was the single most important principle of construction. To build in harmony with the sky was to build a society in balance with the fundamental order of the universe. Leading researchers like Dr. emphasized that these alignments were a profound statement. They physically demonstrated a ruler's or a culture's connection to the divine, granting legitimacy and promising stability. The core idea is breathtaking in its ambition. These cities were conceived as microcosms, perfect scale models of the celestial macrocosm. Every street became a river of stars, every central plaza a symbolic meeting point between earth and sky. The goal was to channel what they saw as cosmic energy, a divine breath, directly into the heart of daily life, ensuring prosperity, order, and continuity. This foundational belief, that human destiny was written in the stars and could be mirrored on the ground, is the master key we must now use to unlock the secrets of specific, vanished metropolises. That precise 15.5-degree tilt of the city's grid is not a mistake, it is a signature. It points the entire metropolis, like a colossal arrow, toward the horizon where the Pleiades star cluster, known to cultures worldwide as the Seven Sisters, would have risen at a pivotal moment in the city's founding. This is the first architectural fingerprint, a decision so deliberate it transcends mere surveying. The main axis, the Avenue of the Dead, does not run north-south as you might expect. Instead, it aligns with this celestial event, making the city itself a permanent calendar stone, marking a time when the heavens were believed to bless the land. But the cosmic mirroring goes far deeper than a single alignment. Look at the three monumental structures that define the city's core. The Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the complex with its Temple of the Feathered Serpent are not placed randomly. Researchers have noted that their relative sizes and distances from one another appear to deliberately mirror the proportional distances between the Sun, the Earth, and the planets in our solar system. The Pyramid of the Sun, the largest, could represent our own star. The Pyramid of the Moon, though smaller, holds a commanding position at the avenue's end, much like our Moon's relationship to Earth. A vast sunken plaza might stand in for another celestial body. Together, they form what scholars call a terrestrial orrery, a massive, static model of the heavens built in stone and earth. Who was the mind behind this scheme? The silence is profound. Left no deciphered written records, no royal tombs proclaiming a great builder's name. This leads to a compelling question. Was this the work of a single, anonymous genius, a master architect who convinced a civilization to build his stellar vision? Or was it the product of a sustained tradition, a council of priest astronomers who, over generations, refined this sacred geometry? The city itself argues for a unified, original plan. The sheer scale and coordination required to execute such a precise orientation from the very first foundations suggests a singular, overwhelming vision imposed on the landscape. The architect, whether one person or a guiding school, understood that to build a city that would last for centuries, it must first be anchored in eternity. They designed not just for the people who would walk its streets, but for the cosmos they believed watched over it. The true monument therefore, is not any single pyramid, but the entire urban canvas, a silent testament to a planner whose name is gone but whose celestial blueprint endures. High on the slopes of Mount, the sanctuary of Delphi was not merely built on sacred ground, it was engineered as a cosmic instrument. This was the place the ancient Greeks called the omphalos, the navel of the world, where the divine will was whispered through the oracle. To the untrained eye, the arrangement of its treasuries, altars, and temples might appear haphazard, a collection of structures jostling for space on a steep mountainside. But this apparent chaos is a brilliant illusion. Every stone was placed according to a hidden celestial blueprint. Ancient sources give us a tantalizing, frustrating clue. They credit the sanctuary's design not to a known historical engineer, but to a mythical figure named, a master builder said to have been instructed directly by the gods. This attribution is itself a profound piece of the puzzle. It tells us that the knowledge required to design Delphi was considered so extraordinary, so beyond ordinary human skill, that it could only have come from a supernatural source. The architect, in the cultural memory, had to be more than a man. So what did this divine instruction manual contain? The central temple of Apollo, where the Pythia delivered her prophecies, is precisely aligned with the rising point of the constellation Delphinus, the dolphin, a creature sacred to Apollo. This is no casual stargazing. It means on specific nights, the first light of that constellation would have shone directly down the temple's axis, as if illuminating the path for the god's voice. Furthermore, the entire sacred precinct is oriented to capture the dramatic light of the winter solstice sunrise. On that shortest day of the year, the sun's rays would have penetrated the sanctuary in a very specific way, perhaps striking a particular altar or statue, marking a powerful transition in the cosmic cycle. But the genius of Delphi's unknown planner goes beyond simple alignments. They used the site's dramatic topography as an amplifier. The deep ravine of the valley and the towering cliffs created unique acoustics and wind channels. The famous chasm from which intoxicating vapors were said to rise was likely a geological feature strategically incorporated into the design. The architect understood that the oracle's power depended on atmosphere, on a sense of otherworldly connection. By positioning the temple to harness celestial events and leveraging the mountain's own natural drama, they created a multi-sensory experience. The trembling pilgrim, witnessing the solstice light or hearing the wind howl through the sacred cleft, was already in a state of heightened awareness before the prophecy was even spoken. The oracle's pronouncements, therefore, were not random utterances. They were the climax of a meticulously staged dialogue with the cosmos, orchestrated by a designer who used architecture, astronomy, and landscape to blur the line between the earthly and the divine. The real prophecy at Delphi may have been the sanctuary itself, a permanent statement that true wisdom comes from aligning human space with the eternal rhythms above. This celestial blueprint required a universal language, one that could translate the harmony of the spheres into the geometry of a street corner or the proportions of a temple wall. For the forgotten architects, that language was sacred geometry. Beyond simple star alignments, they employed a hidden grammar of shapes and ratios, a mathematical toolkit believed to be the very framework of creation itself. Think of it this way. If aligning a city to a star was like tuning an instrument to a single note, then sacred geometry was the composition of the entire symphony. It provided the rules for how the parts related to the whole, creating structures that felt inherently balanced and alive. The most famous of these principles is the golden ratio, often represented by the Greek letter phi. This is a specific proportional relationship, roughly 1.618 to 1, that appears repeatedly in nature, from the spiral of a nautilus shell to the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower. The architects saw this ratio as divine handwriting, a cosmic constant. By embedding phi into their designs, they were quite literally building the law of natural growth and beauty into their cities. This ratio connects directly to the sequence, a series of numbers where each is the sum of the two preceding ones. The ratios between successive numbers converge on the golden ratio. These were not abstract math problems. They were observed patterns, a numerical code that seemed to govern the unfolding of life. Using them in urban design was an act of sympathetic magic, an attempt to ensure the city itself would thrive and propagate with the same effortless perfection as a growing vine. Another profound concept was the reconciliation of fundamental shapes, most notably the squared circle. The circle, with no beginning and no end, represented heaven, eternity, and the divine. The square, with its four equal sides, represented the earth, the four cardinal directions, and the material world. The challenge and the triumph of sacred geometry was to square the circle, to find a harmonious relationship between these two forms. The layout of certain medieval cities, like Siena in Italy, can be seen as attempts at this. The central plaza might function as a symbolic circle within the city's broader grid, a sacred center where the heavenly could manifest within the earthly order. This was more than symbolism. It was a diagram of a philosophical ideal, a map of how a community believed the universe was structured. Then there are the generative patterns, shapes believed to hold life-giving power. The almond shape created by the overlap of two circles of the same size was seen as a symbol of conception and the intersection of realms. From this simple form, more complex patterns like the seed of life and the flower of life could be generated, patterns found etched into ancient temples across the world from Egypt to Japan. These were not decorative doodles. They were considered the foundational blueprints of existence, the geometric templates from which all matter and life emerged. To inscribe these patterns into the foundation stones of a city, or to design a market plaza based on these proportions, was to tap directly into the generative force of the cosmos. It was believed to bless the city with fertility, vitality, and resilience. So when we look at an ancient urban plan that feels inexplicably harmonious, we are not just seeing clever surveying. We are reading a text written in the language of sacred geometry, a silent prayer built in stone, asking the mathematical order of the heavens to govern the bustling life of the earth below. Yet the most systematic application of this cosmic code may lie in the east, within the grand capitals of ancient China. Here, the alignment of heaven and earth was not a mystical secret, but a formal state doctrine, meticulously administered by a hidden class of bureaucratic savants. The imperial city was to be a perfect echo of the celestial order, and the tool for this translation was an ancient body of knowledge we now call, but which they knew as the art of harmonizing wind and water with the stars. The foundational text for this practice was the Book of Burial, which extended its principles to the dwelling places of both the living and the ancestors. It provided the rules for situating and orienting a city to channel benevolent cosmic forces, known as Sheng-Chi, and to defend against chaotic ones. At the helm of this colossal undertaking was a figure whose title we know, but whose personal name is almost always lost, the Grand Astrologer or Royal Astronomer. This was no mere stargazer. There was the Emperor's chief advisor on cosmic affairs, a master of calendrics, divination, and geomancy. His primary task was to read the will of heaven and then to design the physical world, from the palace to the tomb, in accordance with it. He was the ultimate architect of legitimacy, working in silence. When a new dynasty rose, one of its first acts was to commission a new capital, a fresh start in stone and earth that would proclaim its heavenly mandate. His bureau would survey the land, not just for resources, but for dragon veins, auspicious mountains, and benevolent watercourses. Then they would impose a grid upon it, a grid that mirrored a specific region of the night sky, the purple forbidden enclosure. In Chinese astronomy, this was the circumpolar region around the North Star, seen as the celestial court of the heavenly emperor and his retinue. The earthly capital was to be its direct reflection. The North Star, eternally fixed, corresponded to the emperor's throne in the innermost palace. The constellations surrounding it became the ministries, bureaus, and barracks of the imperial city. The walls and gates of En, for instance, were not just defensive structures, they were symbolic constellations in their own right, controlling the flow of energy and people just as stars governed celestial influences. The main processional avenue, running on a precise north-south axis, was the cosmic pillar, the path of heavenly authority descending directly into the heart of imperial power. This symbolism reached its profound apex in the design of the Ming tombs and their sacred way. The long, spirit path leading to the burial mounds was not a simple road. It was a carefully staged journey through a microcosm of the cosmos, lined with statues of mythical guardians and officials, representing the celestial bureaucracy the emperor would join in the afterlife. The entire necropolis was situated and shaped according to these principles, ensuring the dynasty's ancestors rested in a spot of potent earthly chi, which would in turn nourish and protect the living empire. This was the ultimate act of urban design, where the city of the living and the city of the dead were bookends of the same cosmic statement. The power of the emperor was legitimate because his domain was a conscious, precise copy of the sky itself. And the men who drew the blueprints, and his geomancers, remained shadows. Their genius was absorbed into the glory of the dynasty they served, their individual identities erased by the very system they perfected. They built not for personal fame, but to weave the threads of celestial order into the fabric of an empire, ensuring that every wall, every gate, and every street silently whispered the same unchallengeable truth, that the ruler below mirrored the sovereign above. The question remains, how can we be sure? Is a city aligned to a star by chance or by the hand of a master? To answer this, we must turn to a field of science that reads the sky written in the stones. This is archaeoastronomy, the marriage of archaeology and celestial science. It provides the rigorous toolkit we use to test our theories, to separate fascinating coincidence from undeniable design. The process begins not with a shovel, but with software. Programs like allow researchers to wind back the cosmic clock, recreating the precise night sky over a specific location thousands of years ago. This reveals what stars or constellations would have been visible on the horizon at a given moment, like the founding of a city or a solstice sunrise. But the digital sky must meet the physical ground. Teams then conduct meticulous on-site surveys using tools like theodolites, high-precision instruments for measuring angles. They map the exact orientation of a pyramid's face, a temple doorway, or a long ceremonial avenue. The crucial step is comparison. Does the measured alignment on the ground match a significant celestial event in the reconstructed ancient sky? And is that match statistically significant? If a city's main axis points to a random patch of empty sky, it's likely meaningless. But if it consistently points to the rising point of the sun on the winter solstice, or the helical rising of a star like Sirius, across multiple sites built by the same culture, the probability of coincidence plummets. This is the concrete evidence we seek. Pioneering work in this field was done by Alexander, a Scottish engineer who spent decades surveying hundreds of megalithic sites across Britain and France in the mid-20th century. His painstaking measurements revealed something astonishing. Sites like Stonehenge were not alone. He identified numerous stone circles and standing stones that demonstrated a sophisticated, shared understanding of lunar cycles. These builders tracked the moon's complex 18.6-year cycle, marking its most extreme rising and setting points, known as the major and minor lunar standstills, with incredible precision. His work proved that Neolithic communities, long before written records, possessed a precise, observational astronomy that they encoded permanently into their landscape. This scientific lens changes everything. It allows us to move from speculation to supported conclusion. When we stand at and measure that 15.5-degree offset, and the software shows the Pleiades climbing over the distant mountains exactly along that line 2,000 years ago, we are no longer just telling a story. We are recovering a fragment of a lost blueprint. We are providing the evidence that the patterns we see are not in our imagination, but are the deliberate, calculated work of forgotten engineers. These individuals were not mystics gazing vaguely at the stars. They were applied scientists, using rigorous observation and geometry to anchor their world to the heavens. Archaeoastronomy gives them back their voice, allowing us to hear, across the centuries, the meticulous calculations of minds that sought to build eternity itself. But the celestial blueprint did not vanish with the ancient world. It resurfaced centuries later, reborn in the minds of Renaissance visionaries who saw themselves not as inventors, but as of a lost divine science. This was the age of the ideal city, a radical attempt to build a perfect human community from first principles, and those principles were once again written in the stars. The catalyst was a powerful intellectual revival, the rediscovery of ancient texts attributed to the mythical sage Hermes. These Hermetic teachings, blended with Neoplatonic philosophy, proposed a universe where everything was connected through a web of celestial correspondences. The microcosm mirrored the macrocosm. To the Renaissance mind, this was not a metaphor, it was an architectural mandate. If a human being was a small reflection of the cosmos, then a city, the highest creation of collective humanity, should be a perfect, ordered reflection of that same cosmic harmony. This belief transformed architects into magi, and their blueprints into acts of philosophical magic. Consider the remarkable case of a sculptor and architect who designed the entirely theoretical city for his patron. His plan was a star fort, an 8-pointed geometric shape radiating from a central plaza. But this was not just for defense. The 8 points corresponded to the 8 winds, a classical concept, and the radial streets created precise axes that could, in theory, be aligned to celestial phenomena. Wrote extensively about infusing the city with astrological virtue, placing specific buildings under the influence of specific planets to ensure the health and fortune of its inhabitants. He was designing a living talisman in stone, a machine for generating harmony between man and cosmos. While it was never fully built, its ideas were profoundly influential, proving that the dream of a stellar city was very much alive. This dream found its most spectacular expression not on a blank slate, but layered atop the greatest palimpsest of all, Rome. In the late 16th century, Pope V embarked on a breathtaking urban transformation. His goal was to make Rome the undisputed spiritual capital of the world, a theater of the world, and his chief tool was the straight line. He pierced new, long, arrow-straight avenues through the medieval tangle of streets, connecting major basilicas across the city. But these were not mere traffic solutions. They were precisely calculated. On specific feast days, a standing at the beginning of one of these new streets would have a direct, unobstructed view of the distant church, its facade illuminated by the rising or setting sun. The entire city became a calendar and a pilgrimage map, aligning the physical movement of the faithful with the liturgical cycle of the church. The cosmos was now Christianized, but the principle of alignment remained supreme. His most audacious astronomical instruments, however, were the ancient Egyptian obelisks he had moved and re-erected at key nodal points across Rome. To his advisors, these were not pagan relics, but symbols of divine light and stability. They were repurposed as giant gnomons, the pointers of colossal sundials. The most famous, the obelisk in St. Peter's Square, functions this way still. The circular paving stones around it mark the hours and the signs of the zodiac, turning the heart of Christendom into a monumental cosmic clock. The message was clear: the order of heaven governed time itself, and the Church, through its wise stewardship of this ancient wisdom, was the rightful interpreter of that order. Who were the masterminds behind this celestial re-engineering of Rome? They were a shadowy circle of polymaths, artists, philosophers, and perhaps even occultists, advising the Pope. Figures like the architect Fontana, who executed the incredible engineering feat of moving the obelisks, and the mathematician and astronomer, who likely calculated the precise alignments. Their contributions were often technical, their esoteric motivations downplayed by later historians who preferred to see the project as purely practical or solely religious. But the evidence is etched into the city's very bones. The Baroque splendor that followed, with its dramatic vistas and overwhelming grandeur, rests upon this hidden, rational skeleton of Hermetic design. The forgotten architects of the Renaissance succeeded in their ultimate aim. They built a new kind of sacred space, where the glory of God was demonstrated not just in scripture and art, but in the silent, perfect geometry that connected every street and square to the motion of the sun and the turning of the seasons. They proved the ancient idea was timeless, that to design a city is to make a statement about humanity's place in the universe. Yet these celestial blueprints were too valuable, too powerful, to be left to the whims of shifting dynasties and crumbling empires. Their survival required a different kind of vessel, not stone or parchment, but people bound by oath and tradition. When the great astrologer architects vanished from official records, their knowledge did not disappear. It went underground, entrusted to secretive networks that operated in the shadows of history. These were the initiatory schools and craft guilds, the hidden custodians of a sacred science. In the ancient world, groups like the Dionysian artificers were not merely builders of theaters, they were a religious brotherhood. Initiates progressed through stages of understanding, learning to see the harmonic proportions in music, the geometry in living forms, and finally, the celestial patterns that should govern human spaces. Their knowledge was experiential, passed from master to apprentice in rituals that emphasized the symbolic meaning of tools and measurements. The compass and square were not just instruments, they were emblems of cosmic principles, the circle of heaven and the square of earth. This model of secret transmission became the template for survival. As the Roman Empire fragmented and grand urban planning ceased, the keepers of this geometric and astronomical flame were often the very men working with stone. The medieval stonemasons' guilds protected their trade secrets fiercely. Their lodges were places of both practical craft and speculative philosophy. To construct a cathedral, one needed to understand load, stress, and geometry. But the cathedral itself was a sermon in stone, its layout aligning with solstice sunrises, its rose windows echoing cosmic patterns like the rosette of stars. The master mason who designed it was applying a body of knowledge that fused mathematics, astronomy, and theology, a lineage that likely stretched back to antiquity. This esoteric current surfaced dramatically in the early modern period with the rise of speculative Freemasonry. No longer just a trade guild, it became a fraternity dedicated to moral and intellectual enlightenment through symbolism. And at the heart of its symbolism lay the tools and principles of the architect. Rituals are steeped in the language of building, of constructing a spiritual temple within the individual, which mirrors the construction of a perfect society. Their diagrams feature the compass, the square, the plumb line, and the blazing star, all pointing to an ordered universe. This was not idle ceremony. It was the preservation of a worldview, one that saw the proper design of the physical world as a path to human perfection. The most compelling evidence for this hidden transmission is etched into the streets of a modern capital. The original plan for Washington, D.C., overseen by Pierre Charles and later refined by and Benjamin, is deeply infused with Masonic symbolism. President George Washington, a prominent Freemason, laid the cornerstone using the lodge's full ceremonial ritual. The city's layout is a geometric puzzle of radiating avenues superimposed on a grid, creating powerful diagonal. These avenues often connect key points, like the Capitol and the White House, but researchers note they also create alignments to celestial events, such as the summer solstice sunset viewed from certain vantage points. The most striking feature is the pentagram formed by the arrangement of major circles and avenues. While some debate its intentionality, its presence aligns perfectly with the Masonic reverence for geometric forms as expressions of divine order. This suggests that the founders of the American Republic, many of whom were Freemasons, were consciously attempting to build a new kind of sacred space, a city for a secular nation that still drew upon the ancient idea of terrestrial celestial harmony. They were, in a sense, the last in a long line of forgotten architects. They worked not for a pharaoh or an emperor, but for an idea, and they used the symbolic language passed down through secret societies to encode that idea into the very plan of the capital. The street grid of Washington, D.C. is therefore more than a map. It is a manuscript, a silent testament to an unbroken chain of knowledge. It whispers that the dream of mirroring the stars in our cities never truly died. It was simply carried in the minds and rituals of hidden hands, waiting for the moment to lay a new foundation. But perhaps the most profound challenge to our entire idea of a city comes from a tradition where the architecture was never built, because it was already here. In the vast expanse of Australia, for over 60,000 years, indigenous cultures have practiced a form of urban design so integrated that it dissolves the boundary between map and territory, between street and star. This is the world of the. Imagine a highway system, but one made not of asphalt, but of story, song, and sacred geography. It is a living narrative pathway that crisscrosses the continent, tracing the journeys of the ancestral beings of the Dreamtime. As these creator beings moved across the land, singing it into existence, their actions formed the mountains, the rivers, the water holes, and every distinctive rock. Crucially, their paths across the earth were mirrored by their paths across the sky. The same ancestral being might be embodied in a specific rock formation here on the ground and a specific constellation up above. The song that describes the journey past that rock is the same song that charts the movement of that star. The land itself, in all its natural features, becomes the city, and the architects are the ancestors themselves, whose creative acts in the Dreamtime laid down the original, perfect blueprint. Human beings do not build this city, they maintain it. The custodians are the elders and knowledge keepers who memorize the epic songs, sometimes hundreds of kilometers long, that detail every step of the journey. By singing the songs while walking the land, they perform a vital act of preservation. They are quite literally keeping the world in order, renewing the connection between the celestial narrative and its earthly reflection. A particular cluster of stars might correspond to a group of granite boulders. A bend in the river in the song might align with the helical rising of a planet. This turns the entire continent into a massive, interactive celestial map. To know the song is to be able to navigate vast distances, because the lyrics describe the landmarks. But it is more than navigation, it is a sacred duty. The ceremonies performed at specific sites, like a particular waterhole or a unique tree, are not just commemorations. They are understood as essential rituals that sustain the fertility of the land and the balance of life, activated at the correct time according to the celestial calendar mirrored in the song. This system presents a breathtaking alternative to everything we have discussed. Here, there is no central planner whose name is lost, because the planner is the mythic ancestor. There is no parchment blueprint, because the blueprint is the living landscape and the memory of the people. There is no monument that might fall into ruin, because the monuments are the natural world itself, maintained through story. It challenges us to expand our definition of architecture to include the intentional, sacred understanding of natural topography. It shows us that the most enduring urban plan may not be made of stone and mortar, but of narrative and ceremony, a design where every person who learns the song becomes a living stone in a celestial city that has never been forgotten, because it is sung into existence with every generation. The shadow of a simple wooden pole is the first tool of cosmic engineering. To align a metropolis with the sun, the architect began with a gnomon, a vertical stake planted firmly in the cleared earth. As the sun arced across the sky, its shadow traced a path. Day after day, the architect marked the shadow's tip at its farthest reach, the point of the longest shadow cast at noon. By connecting these points over the course of a year, a pattern emerged, a graceful, elongated figure-8 curve called an analemma. The two extreme ends of this curve marked the winter and summer solstices, the sun's southernmost and northernmost limits. With nothing more than patience, a stick, and a string, the master planner had now anchored their entire design to the solar year. They could draw a true east-west line by bisecting the angle between these solstice points, establishing a celestial baseline from which all other measurements would flow. This was the humble, brilliant genesis of a city aligned to the heavens. But how do you extend that perfect line across miles of uneven terrain to lay out the foundations for a city meant to house tens of thousands? For this, ancient surveyors developed a method of elegant simplicity known as the Indian circle. They would place a central gnomon and draw a large circle in the dirt around it using a rope. As the sun rose, they would mark where the morning shadow of the gnomon touched the circle. In the afternoon, they would mark the spot where the evening shadow touched the circle again. A line drawn between these 2 points gave a precise east-west axis. The sheer beauty of this method is its self-correcting nature. It works regardless of the season or the flatness of the ground. Once the primary axes were established, they could be extended indefinitely using a series of aligned marker posts, creating the vast, geometric grids we see at places like. Creating that grid on the floodplains of the Indus River, however, was another monumental challenge. Its almost unnervingly precise layout, with its standardized brick sizes and north-south, east-west oriented streets, required an immense flat plain. Here, the engineer's tool was water. They mastered the use of simple water levels, perhaps a length of hollow reed or a carved wooden trough. Water always finds its level, providing a perfectly horizontal reference line over any distance. Teams of workers could use these to grade vast areas, building up platforms and terracing land to create the uniform foundation the cosmic blueprint demanded. The logistical coordination is staggering, involving not just surveyors, but thousands of laborers moving earth and fabricating millions of identical bricks, all working toward a single, unified plan issued by an authority whose name we do not know. This same convergence of celestial vision and terrestrial effort is visible across the world at Great Zimbabwe. The construction of its massive, curving granite walls, assembled without mortar, required more than stonemasonry. It demanded precise astronomical oversight. The entire complex is oriented. The great enclosure's main entrance aligns with the rising of certain stars significant to the Shona people, while specific niches and monoliths within the walls are positioned to capture the light of the solstice sun. To achieve this, the master builders likely used the horizon itself as their instrument, sighting across elevated points on the surrounding hills to key celestial events, then translating those down to the construction site below. The movement of the thousands of granite blocks, some weighing many tons, and the organization of a society capable of such a sustained, coordinated effort speaks to a shared belief powerful enough to move mountains. The will to impose a cosmic pattern onto the chaotic earth required a fusion of spiritual conviction and technical genius. These forgotten architects were not just designers, they were the ultimate project managers of the ancient world, orchestrating a symphony of labor, material, and mathematics to build a prayer in stone that would endure for. A silent city waits beneath the sun, its streets running straight as ruled lines to the edge of the earth. And Harappa are marvels of order, their existence a quiet rebuke to every chaotic, winding medieval town that came after. Here, over 4,000 years ago, someone designed the perfect urban machine. Every brick, from to distant settlements hundreds of miles apart, conformed to a standard ratio. Every main avenue aligned precisely north-south or east-west. Every home connected to a sophisticated, covered drainage system that would not be matched for. This was not organic growth. This was a blueprint executed with breathtaking discipline. And yet, the architects who drafted that blueprint left behind no statues, no grand tombs, no inscribed pillars boasting of their genius. Their names are the silence between the bricks. This is our sixth mystery, the case of the anonymous grid master of the Indus Valley. The scale of the planning is almost unnerving. To impose such uniformity across a civilization spanning nearly 1,000,000 square kilometers required more than a good idea, it demanded a doctrine. A central authority, perhaps a council of elders or a guild of master surveyors, must have issued the standards and held builders to them. This suggests a society that valued collective harmony and functional perfection above individual glorification. But was this purely pragmatic, a simple solution for efficient construction and flood management? Or was there a deeper, cosmological heartbeat beneath the grid? The precise cardinal orientation offers a profound clue. Aligning a city exactly to the four directions is incredibly difficult without a magnetic compass, which they did not have. It requires celestial observation, tracking the sun and stars to find true north. This is an act of deliberate connection to the cosmos. The grid, therefore, may not just be about traffic flow, it could be a physical manifestation of a worldview based on cosmic order, balance, and equilibrium. The city becomes a mandala, a geometric representation of a stable universe, with its central citadel perhaps symbolizing the axis, the world's center. This leads us to the Great Wall of Silence, the Indus script. Thousands of inscribed seals and tablets have been found, covered in elegant, undeciphered symbols. They likely recorded names, transactions, and titles, but significantly, none have been found that are monumental. None shout the achievements of a king or a builder. This absence is deafening. In Egypt, pharaohs covered walls with their names. In Mesopotamia, kings stamped bricks with their titles. In the Indus Valley, the city itself is the signature. The collective achievement was paramount. This suggests a radical idea that the architects and rulers purposefully subsumed their individual identities into the utopian urban ideal. To be forgotten was not a failure, it may have been the point. Their legacy was not a personal dynasty, but the harmonious function of the society they designed. The grid was their philosophy made stone, a belief that perfect order on Earth would yield perfect stability in life. Who were these forgotten designers? Were they a priestly class who understood the stars as markers of divine order? Or were they the world's first pragmatic urbanists, a bureaucratic elite who saw geometry as the tool for social harmony? The truth likely lives in the space between. They were likely both, seeing no distinction between the cosmic and the civic. By aligning their cities to the cardinal points, they anchored human society to the eternal directions of the universe. By standardizing the brick, they created a common language of construction. By building the drains, they enacted a principle of purity and balance. Their anonymity is their most striking feature. They built a civilization that thrived for centuries with remarkable stability, showing little evidence of warfare or dramatic social inequality, and they asked for no credit. In their silence, they achieved something extraordinary. They became the ultimate forgotten architects, their identities erased not by time, but by their own success, dissolved into the perfect, silent grid of a city that needed no king's name to proclaim its genius. The city gate was never just a door in a wall. It was a threshold between worlds, a point where the cosmic order met the human community. In the urban blueprint, the four main gates aligned to the cardinal directions were not practical afterthoughts. They were the foundational anchors of the entire symbolic system. Each direction held a universe of meaning, a confluence of season, element, celestial body, and protective spirit, all engineered into the city's very perimeter. To pass through the East Gate at dawn was to participate in a daily ritual of rebirth, aligned with the spring equinox and the element of air. The West Gate, facing the dying sun, was associated with autumn, the element of water and the journey into reflection or the afterlife. The North, often linked to earth, winter, and the realm of ancestors or mystery, and the South to fire, summer, and the peak of solar power. The architect who positioned these portals was doing far more than planning traffic. They were choreographing the spiritual and ceremonial life of every citizen. Babylon's Ishtar Gate stands as the most breathtaking example of this principle in action. Its dazzling blue glazed bricks and processional way were not merely for royal pomp. This was a celestial corridor. The New Year festival, the most important event in the Babylonian calendar, involved a ritual procession along this very path. The statues of dragons and bulls that adorned the gate represented specific deities associated with the planet Venus and the constellation Taurus. As the king and priests moved through the gate and down the avenue, they were symbolically reenacting the journey of the planets, reaffirming the covenant between heaven and the city-state. The gate itself was a stationary planet, a fixed point in an urban cosmos designed to mirror the motions of the real one. This transforms our understanding of the ancient cityscape. It was not a collection of buildings, but a ritual landscape, a stage for ceremonies that synchronized human time with solar and stellar cycles. The architect, then, was a playwright of stone and space, scripting the movements of the community through alignments that made the cosmic drama tangible. Every crossing of a threshold became a miniature rite of passage. To enter the city from the south, the direction of the sun's greatest strength might have been reserved for warriors or traders seeking the blessing of power and success. To leave through the western gate could signify a solemn journey or a final departure. This imbued daily life with a layer of sacred geography, where even a mundane commute was framed by a grand, celestial narrative. The gates served as constant, silent reminders that the city was a protected enclosure, a microcosm whose boundaries were by their alignment with the eternal directions. The power of this design lay in its seamless integration. The citizen did not need to understand the complex astronomy, they simply lived within its physical manifestation. They experienced the harmony through the orientation of their streets, the placement of their temples, and the symbolic weight of the gates they passed through daily. The forgotten architect's genius was to build the mythology directly into the infrastructure, making the sacred utterly inseparable from the civic, and ensuring that every stone in the wall whispered of a connection to the stars. Was a calendar carved from cedar and sky. At the great city of Cahokia, a circle of towering wooden posts stood as a silent, sophisticated computer, its programming written in the movements of the sun and the planet Venus. This was the seventh mystery, the work of an eclipse choreographer. The central post, when viewed from a specific observation point, framed the sunrise on the spring and autumn equinoxes, the 2 days of perfect balance. Other posts marked the solstice sunrises, the sun's farthest journey north and south. But the most intriguing alignment points to the maximum northern rising point of Venus, the brilliant morning star. This was not casual stargazing, it was precise, predictive engineering. The master behind this design was almost certainly the figure known as the Great Sun, a ruler who embodied a fusion of political power and celestial priesthood. His authority did not come from a crown alone, but from his demonstrated ability to read the sky and translate its will for the people. The city's colossal centerpiece, Monk's Mound, is not randomly placed. Its vast terraced form is precisely oriented to the same solar and lunar alignments encoded in. This means the entire urban landscape, from the Grand Plaza to the towering earthwork, functioned as a unified instrument. The Great Sun, from his perch atop the mound, could look across the city to the wooden circle and know, with certainty, the turning of the seasons. This knowledge was the engine of the city. It dictated the agricultural calendar, telling tens of thousands when to plant and when to harvest. But its most powerful function was likely social and spiritual, choreographing the mass gatherings that defined life. Imagine the spectacle. On the morning of a solstice or an equinox, thousands would gather in the Grand Plaza. As the sun broke the horizon, its first light would spear precisely between 2 designated posts or blaze a path directly over the central post, validating the Great Sun's sacred knowledge. For a predicted eclipse, the event would be even more profound. The ability to foretell the moon swallowing the sun was the ultimate demonstration of cosmic authority. The Great Sun, through his understanding of the cycles tracked by his wooden observatory, could announce the coming darkness not as a catastrophe, but as a scheduled performance of the gods, a drama he had foreseen. This transformed fear into awe, chaos into ordered ritual. The people would gather, and as the eclipse unfolded exactly as promised, the leader's connection to the heavens was made irrefutable. His celestial authority was not just claimed, it was built into the very earth they stood upon, measured in the shadows cast by his posts and the alignment of his mound. The architect of Cahokia designed more than a city. He designed an experience of cosmic certainty, using astronomy to weave together agriculture, ceremony, and political power into a single, enduring tapestry of communal life. The celestial blueprint did not fade from memory all at once, but was slowly by new maps of meaning. A profound shift began with the rise of monotheistic faiths that viewed the world through a different lens. To these emerging traditions, the old gods were often seen as rivals, and the intricate associations between temples and specific stars could be viewed with deep suspicion. Aligning a city to the Pleiades or Orion was not a celebration of divine order, but a potential act of idolatry, a clinging to a pagan past. This theological shift did not destroy the cities, of course, but it severed the living connection to their original purpose. The alignments remained in the stones, but the knowledge of why they were placed there, the stories and rituals that gave them power, began to retreat from public life. The architects' names, once preserved in oral traditions or priestly lineages, were no longer recited. Their work became a beautiful but inscrutable relic, its meaning locked away. A more practical forgetting arrived with the modern age. As cities grew into engines of commerce and industry, the primary concerns of planners became efficiency, sanitation, and economic output. The question was no longer how to channel the energy of Sirius, but how to move goods from the docks to the market. Urban design became a science of function, of zoning laws and traffic studies. The very idea that a street grid might hold a hidden stellar code seemed like a poetic fantasy, irrelevant to the pressing needs of a burgeoning population. This functionalist worldview actively dismissed the earlier, holistic approach. The architect was redefined as a professional solving material problems, not a philosopher mediating between heaven and earth. From the Renaissance onward, the profession increasingly celebrated the individual genius, the named master like Michelangelo. This focus on singular authorship further obscured the vast, anonymous collective efforts of earlier eras. The teams of surveyors, the guilds of masons, the councils of elders who had implemented these cosmic plans over generations were written out of the story, because history, as it was being written, preferred a single signature on the blueprint. Then came the relentless grind of time and conflict. Oral traditions, the fragile vessels for so much of this knowledge, faded with the passing of elders, especially when societies were disrupted by conquest or disease. Wars and invasions did more than damage structures, they shattered cultural continuity. A new ruling power would often repurpose a sacred site, building their own temple atop the old foundations, literally burying the original astronomical alignments under new layers of stone and new interpretations. The celestial purpose of a place became a ghost in the architecture, a whisper drowned out by louder, more contemporary narratives. The original architects were forgotten not through malice, but through the simple, brutal process of a world moving on, of priorities shifting and stories being rewritten to suit new rulers and new gods. So we are left with a landscape of silent signatures. The decline was not a single event, but a convergence of forces, theological, practical, and historical, that collectively turned a living science into a forgotten mystery. The architects vanished because the world they built for, a world that saw the city as a sacred mirror, itself transformed beyond recognition. Their legacy became a puzzle for a far future to rediscover, a set of questions waiting in the alignment of a wall, the orientation of a gate, asking us to remember a time when to build a home was to converse with the stars. The rigid cloister was a map of paradise, its geometry a prayer in stone. While kingdoms fractured after Rome's fall, the cosmic blueprint did not vanish. It retreated into the ordered silence of the monastery. Here in communities like, the architect was not a forgotten engineer, but a remembered saint, a founding abbot like Bernard. His blueprints were not star charts, but sacred texts and the theological principle of divine light. The goal was no longer to mirror specific constellations, but to create an earthly dwelling worthy of the heavenly Jerusalem, using proportion and alignment to make God's harmony physically present. The entire monastic complex became a spiritual machine, engineered for celestial connection. The church itself was the heart of this machine, and its orientation was never arbitrary. It was almost always built with the altar at the eastern end. This meant that on the morning of the feast day of the saint to whom the church was dedicated, the rising sun would stream directly through the east-facing windows, flooding the altar with light at the very moment of the morning mass. This was not astronomy for agriculture or power, but a liturgy of illumination, a visible sign of divine grace descending on the sacred ceremony. At Chartres Cathedral, this play of light reaches its most sublime expression. The famed stained glass windows, especially the magnificent rose windows, are not just beautiful biblical stories. They are carefully calibrated instruments of light. On the summer solstice, a specific shaft of sunlight strikes a particular mark on the stone floor, a hidden celestial calendar marking the year's peak. Other windows illuminate internal features on specific saints' days. The master masons who built Chartres, though largely anonymous, were inheritors of this sacred geometric tradition, using ratios like the golden section to determine the cathedral's every proportion, from the width of the nave to the height of the spire. These ratios were believed to reflect the very mind of God, the mathematical order underlying creation. The cloister garden, the monastery's tranquil center, embodied this ideal most perfectly. Its 4 walkways around a central green represented the 4 rivers of paradise described in the book of Genesis. Its dimensions were often derived from the biblical descriptions of Solomon's temple or the heavenly city from the book of Revelation. To walk its perimeter in meditation was to traverse a symbolic landscape of salvation, a miniature cosmos in perfect order. The abbot architect, like Saint Bernard, saw his role as a spiritual builder. He was constructing a community of souls, and the physical monastery was the vessel to shape that community. The strict daily schedule mirrored the cosmic order, dividing the day into periods of prayer, work, and study just as the heavens divided time. The alignment of the buildings to the sun, that daily rhythm with light. In this way, the medieval monastic architects performed a profound act of cultural translation. They took the ancient, pagan instinct to align human space with the cosmos and baptized it, redirecting its purpose toward Christian worship and contemplation. The stars themselves were no longer deities to be mirrored, but creations of a single God whose light and order could be glimpsed through sacred geometry and solar alignment. The architects of this era were not forgotten in the same way. Their names were often recorded in hagiographies and monastic chronicles, but they were remembered for their holiness, not their design genius. Their architectural vision was seen as an extension of their piety, a natural outflow of a life devoted to divine harmony. The cosmic blueprint, therefore, survived the so-called Dark Ages not in royal capitals, but in these isolated communities of prayer, quietly kept alive by men who saw the hand of God in every measured line and beam of light. The silence of the stones did not last forever. In the late 19th century, a new kind of observer began to look at ancient ruins not just as art or history, but as pages from a lost astronomical text. The first of these modern detectives was an Italian astronomer far more famous for his maps of Martian canals. Yet his most enduring contribution might be his meticulous study of Roman, the sacred system of land surveying used to lay out colonies and farms. Demonstrated that these surveyed lines, the cardo, were not merely practical grids. They were cosmological acts, aligning new settlements with the 4 cardinal directions in a ritual that echoed the founding of Rome itself, a ceremony believed to replicate the order of the universe. He argued that for the Romans, to measure the land was to consecrate it, to impose a celestial template upon the wilderness. This was a pivotal moment. the first scholarly argument that an ancient civilization's most pragmatic-seeming engineering was, at its heart, a sacred science. A few decades later, French researcher Jean Richer took this idea into the realm of Greek sacred geography. He proposed that major sanctuaries like Delphi, Delos, and Thebes were not placed randomly, but formed precise geometric patterns on the map, patterns that corresponded to significant constellations. His work suggested that the entire landscape of Greece was a vast, coordinated celestial map, with temples acting as terrestrial markers for star groups. While some of Richer's specific alignments were later debated, his core insight was revolutionary. It treated ancient geography as an intentional, intelligent design shaped by astronomical observation. These scholarly threads were picked up and woven into a much broader cultural tapestry during the 1960s and 70s. A wave of fascination with ancient wisdom and alternative history brought concepts like lines into popular imagination. The idea, popularized by amateur archaeologists like Alfred, suggested that ancient sites across Britain were connected by straight, invisible energy lines, forming a giant network across the countryside. This theory, though often speculative and lacking rigorous evidence, served a crucial purpose. It ignited a public passion for Earth mysteries, encouraging people to look at the landscape with new eyes and ask profound questions about the purpose of megaliths and mounds. This popular fascination, for all its fringe elements, created the cultural oxygen that allowed a new academic discipline to breathe. Serious researchers, inspired by both the scholarly groundwork of figures like and the public's hunger for answers, began applying rigorous, scientific methodology to these ancient questions. They used theodolites and early computers to test alignment hypotheses statistically, separating compelling patterns from random chance. This was the birth of modern archaeoastronomy, a field dedicated not to speculation, but to forensic recovery. The work of these 20th-century pioneers, from the cautious astronomer to the enthusiastic amateur, achieved something profound. They began the slow, careful process of giving credit, by inference, to the ancient minds they studied. By proving the intentionality behind a solstice alignment or a cardinal orientation, they restored agency to those forgotten architects. They transformed silent stones back into statements of purpose, allowing us to hear, across the deliberate calculations of planners who saw the sky not as a distant spectacle, but as the ultimate blueprint for a world in harmony. Rises from the plains of India as a sandstone poem to cosmic unity, while history remembers its patron, the great emperor. The hands that drew its lines and raised its walls belong to masters whose names have faded into the stone itself. This is our ninth mystery, the case of the syncretic architects of the empire. His vision was audacious. He sought to create a capital that physically embodied his policy of universal tolerance, a city where Islamic, Hindu, and Persian cosmological ideas could merge into a single, harmonious design. To translate this philosophical ideal into architecture required a hidden council, a team of anonymous astrologers, mathematicians, and master builders who could weave these diverse celestial threads into one urban fabric. The city's very foundation was an act of astrological timing, chosen on the advice of court scholars for its auspicious alignment. Once built, its structures spoke a geometric language of imperial divinity. The Diwanai, the hall of private audience, is its most stunning articulation. At its center stands a single, magnificent carved pillar. From this pillar, 4 stone walkways branch out to balconies in the corners of the room. This is not merely decorative. The central pillar represents the emperor himself, the axis, the fixed pole around which the universe turns. The 4 bridges symbolize his connection to the learned men of all traditions, Islamic scholars, Hindu pundits, Christian priests, and Zoroastrian, who would gather in the corners. Here would sit atop the pillar, literally and symbolically at the center of all worldly wisdom and cosmic order, mediating between heaven and earth. This celestial choreography extends to the city's grand entrance, the colossal, the Gate of Magnificence. Its towering arch is not merely an imposing facade. Researchers note its orientation and proportions may have been calculated to capture the sun's rays at specific times, perhaps on the anniversary of a military victory that was itself seen as divinely ordained, transforming a monument of conquest into one of solar alignment. Even the practical network of water channels and reservoirs, essential for life in the arid climate, likely followed principles of sacred geometry, channeling what was seen as celestial blessing into the city's heart. The genius lies in this seamless synthesis. The anonymous architects did not simply place Islamic arches next to Hindu column designs. They created a new, unified architectural language. A lotus blossom, a profound symbol in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, might be carved into the capital of a pillar supporting a classic arch. The layout of gardens followed the Persian concept of the quadrilateral paradise garden divided by water channels representing the four rivers of life, yet its orientation respected local astronomical observations. This was a cosmic vision made stone, built by a collaborative brain trust of artisans and scholars who subsumed their individual identities into the emperor's grand, unifying project. They worked not for personal glory, but to build a testament to an idea that a truly divine order on earth could only be reflected by a design that embraced all the heavens. The streets themselves became a daily, silent liturgy. To dwell within a city designed as a celestial mirror was to inhabit a living philosophy, where the environment itself shaped the mind and spirit of every citizen. This is the profound psychological impact of urban design, a subtle engineering of human experience through alignment and order. When your home sits on a street that runs perfectly east-west, when your market plaza is a geometric echo of a star cluster, you are not just living in a place, you are living inside a belief system made physical. Environmental psychology suggests that such a highly ordered environment, one rooted in a coherent cosmic logic, fosters a deep, often subconscious sense of stability and belonging. The chaos of the natural world, with its storms and uncertainties, was tamed by the perfect right angles of the grid, a grid that claimed its authority from the even more perfect and eternal motions of the heavens. This created a powerful cognitive anchor. You knew your place, literally and figuratively. Your position in the city's layout connected you to a specific direction, a season, and by extension, a role in the cosmic story. This wasn't about restriction, but about meaning. It answered the fundamental human need to be part of something larger than oneself. The rituals cemented this connection. A festival procession was not merely a parade, it was a collective performance of the city's celestial purpose. Imagine the entire population moving along the Avenue of the Dead during a solstice. As they walked the axis that pointed to the sun's extreme position, they were physically tracing the line of cosmic power the architect had inscribed into the earth. Their footsteps, in unison, activated the alignment. The ceremony synchronized the community's internal rhythm with the external rhythm of the solar year, reinforcing a shared identity that was literally aligned with the universe. Time itself was transformed from a simple linear passage into a sacred cycle, marked not by clocks, but by sunlight striking a particular altar or gateway. This created what philosophers call a phenomenology of place, a deep, embodied experience where the space itself taught you how to be in the world. You felt the summer solstice not just as a hotter day, but as the moment your city was fully charged by the sun's peak journey, a tangible influx of energy and significance. And what of us today, walking through the ruins or even the modern streets built atop these ancient plans? The echo remains. There is a palpable, if wordless, difference between wandering a medieval city's organic, winding lanes and walking the stark, purposeful grid of an Indus Valley settlement or a Roman colony. The latter imposes a different state of mind, one of clarity and intention. Even without knowing the astronomical code, you might feel an uncanny sense of rightness when standing at the end of a long, straight avenue that frames the setting sun on a certain day. That is the lingering whisper of the architect's intent, a subconscious recognition of harmony. They sought to elevate daily life from a series of mundane tasks into a continuous, low-grade cosmic ritual. Every trip to the well, every journey to the temple, became a minor pilgrimage along a celestial axis. This design didn't just house a population, it nurtured a particular consciousness, one that saw the human story as a vital, integrated paragraph in the grand narrative of the stars. The forgotten architects, therefore, were not just builders of walls, but shapers of worlds, using stone and alignment to craft an entire way of being under the open sky. The central court of Knossos is a perfect rectangle of packed earth, a vast open eye gazing at the Cretan sky. For centuries, the sprawling, multi-leveled ruins of the Minoan palaces have been interpreted through myth and archaeology as seats of power, but their deepest secret may be written in their bewildering, non-linear design. Unlike the rigid grids of Mesopotamia or the cardinal axes of Egypt, these complexes feel organic yet deliberate, a maze of corridors, light wells, and storerooms arranged around that central, open court. This unique architecture presents our 10th mystery, the possibility that the palace itself was a cosmological model, and its legendary designer Daedalus represents a lost school of architects who built labyrinths to mirror the stars. The myth is pervasive. Daedalus, the ultimate craftsman, built the labyrinth to contain the Minotaur. But what if the labyrinth was never just a prison for a monster? What if it was the palace itself, and its twisting passages were not meant to confuse, but to guide initiates through a symbolic journey? Some researchers, analyzing the orientation of the central courts at Knossos, and note they are aligned to significant solar events, like the rising of the sun during the equinoxes. Furthermore, the intricate layout of corridors and chambers, when viewed from above, bears a suggestive resemblance to certain star patterns. A compelling, though debated, theory proposes the ground plan of Knossos mirrors the 7 main stars of Major, the Great Bear, a constellation of immense importance across ancient cultures. This would transform the palace from a royal residence into a terrestrial constellation, a place where the ruler's authority was derived from a permanent connection to the circumpolar stars that never set, symbols of eternal power. The legendary Daedalus, then, is less a historical person and more a personification of this architectural philosophy. He is the archetype of the Minoan master builder, a figure who possessed the cunning skill to fabricate wonders that blurred the line between the natural and the artificial, between the earthly palace and the cosmic order. His most famous creations, the labyrinth and the wings of wax and feathers, both speak to this theme, one mapping a complex celestial or underworld journey on the ground, the other enabling a flight toward the sun, a direct engagement with the heavens. This interpretation finds echoes in Minoan art. The famous bull-leaping frescoes are not merely depictions of a sport. They could be seen as ceremonial enactments of a cosmic struggle, with the bull often linked to constellations like Taurus. The precise placement of these artworks within the palace's ritual chambers may have been part of a larger narrative program, a story in paint and plaster that complemented the story told by the architecture. The artifacts themselves offer subtle clues. The orientation of ceremonial axes and the deposition of valuable items in certain rooms align with specific architectural axes, suggesting rituals timed with light penetrating deep into the palace at particular moments. This points to a sophisticated, holistic design where every element, from the grand court to the smallest shrine, was integrated into a functioning microcosm. The palace was a universe in miniature, with the central court as its symbolic sky, the surrounding chambers representing different realms, and the labyrinthine corridors the connective pathways between them. The Minoan architect, a forgotten Daedalus, was thus a philosopher of space. They rejected the straightforward grid in favor of a complex, narrative geometry. They designed not for simple procession, but for revelation through movement. To walk the palace was to navigate a cosmic map, perhaps as part of initiation rites where knowledge was earned through spatial disorientation and rediscovery. The Minotaur at the center, then, might be reinterpreted not as a literal beast, but as the mystery itself, the profound secret of celestial harmony that awaited at the heart of the labyrinthine design. The collapse of Minoan civilization silenced these architects, their principles perhaps surviving only in myth. But the palaces stand as a breathtaking alternative in the history of urban design, proving that mirroring the cosmos did not always require straight lines. Sometimes it required a path that turned back on itself, a maze where the ultimate discovery was the sky above, mirrored in the very ground beneath your feet. The cosmic blueprint did not end with the last stone laid in an ancient capital. It echoes in the glass and steel of our modern age, transformed but still recognizable. Today, the impulse to align our spaces with a grander order persists, though its language has shifted from the literal stars to metaphors of light, geometry, and universal harmony. Consider the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles, perched high above the city. Its very purpose is to connect the public with the cosmos, and its design reinforces this mission. The building is precisely oriented so that on the summer solstice, sunlight passes through a carefully placed aperture in the ceiling, projecting a brilliant spot of light onto a bronze plaque in the central rotunda. This annual event, a modern solstice marker, draws crowds who witness a direct, engineered connection between architecture and celestial motion, a conscious revival of an ancient principle for an educational purpose. Similarly, the United Nations Meditation Room in New York City, though a non-denominational space, was conceived as a sanctuary for global peace under a universal sky. Its sole source of illumination is a single shaft of light that strikes an abstract altar containing a central iron ore block, symbolizing both earthly material and celestial light. The room's serene, minimalist design and its manipulation of natural light create an atmosphere of contemplative unity, aiming to provide a sense of cosmic perspective to delegates from every nation. Perhaps the most ambitious modern attempt to build a city from a unified vision is conceived in the 1950s by urban planner Costa and architect Oscar. It was intended to be the embodiment of a new, progressive future for Brazil. Its layout, when viewed from above, famously resembles a bird or an airplane, but its underlying philosophy is one of radical order. The city's monumental axis, lined with government buildings, and its residential, arranged in a precise, repetitive pattern, represent a complete break from the organic growth of older cities. Use of sweeping curves and columns that lift buildings off the ground was meant to evoke a sense of weightlessness and a new relationship between structure and environment, a kind of futuristic, almost cosmic liberation from the earthbound past. While not aligned to specific stars, was designed according to the modernist principles of, who spoke of a cosmic sense of geometry and the masterly, correct, and magnificent play of masses brought together in light. For these modernists, the cosmos was not a map of deities, but a metaphor for universal mathematical truth and social idealism. The city itself was to be a machine for living, but one that operated with the flawless, impersonal harmony of a well-ordered universe. This shift from literal to metaphorical is the key to understanding the contemporary echo. In our largely secular, scientific age, we no longer believe that aligning a parliament building with the star Sirius will bless our laws. Yet, the deep human desire for an environment that provides meaning, stability, and a connection to something larger than ourselves remains powerfully intact. We now seek that harmony through different means, through sustainable design that connects us to the cycles of nature, through public spaces that foster community, and through architecture that inspires awe with its scale and light. The modern architect, like the ancient one, is still a shaper of human experience. They may use environmental psychology and advanced materials instead of gnomon and rope, but the goal is often strikingly similar: to create places that feel inherently right, that calm our anxieties and elevate our spirits. The question is not whether we have lost the celestial connection, but how we have redefined the celestial. For the ancients, it was the visible, animating intelligence of the night sky. For us, it can be the abstract laws of physics, the awe of deep space revealed by telescopes like the one at Griffith, or the simple, profound need for peace and order in a chaotic world. The forgotten architects' greatest legacy may be this: they taught us that our built environment is never neutral. It is always a statement about our place in the universe. Whether we are tracing the path of a solstice sunbeam onto a museum floor, or designing a city to symbolize a nation's hopes, we are continuing their fundamental project, using space and structure to write our own answer to the oldest question of all: where do we belong in the grand scheme of things? But the rediscovery of these celestial blueprints carries a profound responsibility. We stand before these ancient designs not just as curious observers, but as interpreters of a sacred language we may only partially understand. This leads us to a crucial and often overlooked ethical dimension. As we map the stars and the stones, a complex question emerges: who truly owns this cosmic blueprint? The right to study, interpret, and present these alignments is not a simple matter of academic freedom. It is a delicate intersection of cultural heritage, spiritual belief, and historical justice. Consider the immense monolith of Uluru in the heart of Australia. To the academic or the tourist, it is a breathtaking geological formation, a potential site for archaeological study, or a stunning photo opportunity. But within the Aboriginal tradition, Uluru is a living chapter in an epic narrative. It is not a passive object to be measured and analyzed. It is an active, sacred being, a vital anchor in a celestial map written in story. Specific knowledge about its formations, its connections to certain stars, and the ceremonies associated with it are often restricted, belonging to specific elders and knowledge keepers. For an outside researcher to publish detailed alignments or spiritual meanings without deep, respectful collaboration is not just ethically questionable. It can be seen as a form of cultural appropriation, a violation of a living tradition's sacred privacy. This tension between scientific curiosity and protected wisdom exists at countless sites worldwide. The celestial codes we are so eager to crack were never meant to be mere data points in a research paper. They were, and for many still are, a spiritual technology, a means of maintaining balance between the community, the land, and the cosmos. The forgotten architect's intent was deeply woven into the cultural fabric of their people. To extract the geometric pattern while ignoring its spiritual heartbeat is to create a hollow shell of the original design. So, what is the path forward? It requires a shift from a model of extraction to one of collaboration. This means that academic institutions and independent researchers have a responsibility to engage with descendant communities not as mere informants, but as essential partners and co-stewards of knowledge. It involves listening more than speaking, understanding that some knowledge may be meant to remain within the community, not for public dissemination. It means presenting findings in a way that honors the original intent, framing alignments not as clever ancient engineering tricks, but as expressions of a sophisticated philosophical and spiritual worldview. This collaborative approach enriches our understanding immeasurably. When a Western works alongside an indigenous elder, the alignment of a temple to a solstice sunrise gains a layer of meaning no theodolite can measure. The star becomes not just a point of light, but an ancestor, the sunrise not just an event, but a moment of renewal prescribed in song. This partnership does not diminish the scientific rigor, it deepens the human story. It allows us to see the blueprint not as a dead schematic, but as a living covenant between a people and the sky. The ethical imperative, then, is clear. Our fascination with these forgotten architects must be tempered with humility. We are not just uncovering secrets, we are handling a legacy. The greatest respect we can pay to those who designed cities to mirror the stars is to ensure that our rediscovery honors the spiritual gravity of their work and supports the living cultures who are the rightful inheritors of their celestial vision. Their city had no walls, for its streets were the boundless pathways of the sea. Across the vast Pacific, the greatest architects were not masons, but master navigators who planned a civilization not on land, but on the shifting, starlit ocean. Their urban planning was a living, mental map of thousands of miles, a network connecting scattered islands into a single, dynamic realm. This is our 11th mystery, the story of the stellar navigators who designed Polynesia. For them, the celestial blueprint was not a static grid, but a moving target, a set of star paths called. Each destination island was associated with a specific star or constellation that rose or set directly above it. To voyage from Tahiti to Hawaii, the navigator would memorize the star that pointed the way, holding its position in his mind long after it had dipped below the horizon. He sailed not by following a coastline, but by maintaining a mental fix on a celestial point, steering his vessel along an invisible highway in the sky. This knowledge transformed the entire ocean from a terrifying void into a charted, knowable space, a cosmic city with islands as its neighborhoods, connected by stellar avenues. Once an island was reached, the celestial order was etched into the land itself. In Hawaii, the system divided each island into wedge-shaped sections running from the mountain peaks down to the coral reefs. This was not just a practical division of resources, from upland forests to fishing grounds. It was a sacred geography, a direct terrestrial mirror of the cosmic hierarchy. The mist-shrouded mountain summit, or was the realm of the gods, analogous to the highest heavens. The cultivated slopes and human settlements below represented the middle world, and the shoreline where land met sea was the interface with the ancestral and spiritual depths. A family living within and understood their place in this vertical cosmology, from the clouds to the ocean, just as they understood their relationship to the stars that guided their ancestors to that very shore. The navigator's genius lay in holding both scales in mind simultaneously. He could envision the grand celestial map of the Pacific while also understanding how to orient a new settlement so its central temple, or was placed correctly within the local landscape's sacred geometry. His tools were not compass and sextant, but his own senses trained to an extraordinary degree. He read the subtle patterns of swells refracted by distant islands, the flight paths of homing birds, the color and temperature of the water, and the specific bioluminescence in the night sea. All of this sensory data was layered over the primary map of the stars. His celestial charts were not drawn, but performed, encoded in chants and genealogies that were recited to maintain the knowledge across generations. A single chant could contain the sailing directions, the star courses, the names of the ocean currents, and the stories of the ancestors who first made the voyage. This oral tradition was the living library of Polynesian urban planning. To be an architect in this world was to be a keeper of songs, a person who could rebuild the entire network of civilization from memory. These navigators designed a civilization in perpetual, graceful motion. Their monuments were not pyramids of stone, but the double-hulled voyaging canoes, which were themselves microcosms of the universe, with sacred spaces and social structures mirrored. Their greatest architectural feat was the settlement of the most isolated islands on the planet, a feat that required envisioning a destination over the horizon and then constructing a society there that faithfully reflected the cosmic order they carried within them. They remind us that a city can be a process, not just a place. It can be the act of connection itself, the courage to sail into the unknown with nothing but the stars as your blueprint and the unwavering belief that you can build a home wherever the heavens guide you to land. The compass on your phone holds a key to a hidden city. You do not need a degree in archaeology to become a detective of the celestial blueprint. You simply need to look at your own surroundings with a new set of questions. This is not about proving a grand theory, but about cultivating a way of seeing, a habit of noticing the quiet conversation between human design and the sky. Your journey begins with the simplest tool of all, observation. Start with the oldest structure in your town, perhaps a church, a city hall, or a monument in the central square. On a clear morning, use a basic compass app on your smartphone. Stand at its main entrance and take a reading. Does the building face directly east or very close to it? Many historic churches in the Christian tradition were deliberately oriented with the altar at the eastern end, so the rising sun would illuminate it during morning services. This is a direct, accessible example of solar alignment that you can verify with your own eyes and a common device. Next, consider the street grid itself. In many older planned towns, especially those from the Roman era or later colonial periods, the main streets often follow a cardinal orientation. Use your mapping app's satellite view to look down on your neighborhood. Do you see a clear north-south, east-west pattern? Or perhaps a radial design, with streets emanating from a central point like the spokes of a wheel? These geometric patterns are the first clue that a place was built from a plan, not just organically grown, and many such plans had cosmological intentions. Your investigation then moves from the physical to the historical. When was your town officially founded? A quick search at a local library or historical society can reveal the prevailing worldview of that era. A town established in the medieval period would have a different cosmic outlook than one founded during the Enlightenment. Knowing the founding date allows you to ask a more informed question. What did the people who laid the first cornerstone believe about the universe, and how might they have wanted to reflect that in their streets? Look for old maps, if you can find them. Sometimes, the original name of a main avenue or a public square can be a clue, referencing a saint whose feast day aligns with a solstice, or a classical myth connected to a constellation. This kind of research turns a casual walk into a treasure hunt through layers of meaning. Technology offers another powerful lens. With applications like Google Earth, you can survey landscapes from above without leaving your home. Zoom in on ancient sites, old city centers, or even the farmland around you. Look for unusual geometric patterns, circles within squares, long straight trackways extending over the horizon, or the placement of multiple churches in a seemingly deliberate formation. While not every pattern is celestial, noticing them is the first step. You can then use the sun tracking feature in some astronomy apps to see where the sun rises and sets on the solstices and equinoxes from that specific location. Does that solstice sunrise line up with the main axis of that old church you found? You might be looking at a modern confirmation of an ancient alignment. For those eager to dive deeper, begin with resources that focus on your own region. Books on local history often contain forgotten details about the founders and their philosophies. There are also excellent, accessible websites and organizations dedicated to public archaeoastronomy that explain methods and showcase known sites. The goal is not to become an expert overnight, but to join a community of curiosity. By learning to ask these questions, you transform every city block, every country lane, into a potential page from a lost celestial manuscript. You start to see the landscape not as a passive backdrop, but as an active participant in a story that connects the ground beneath your feet to the timeless motion of the heavens above. The greatest discovery is not always a forgotten alignment, but the awakened sense of wonder that comes from looking at the familiar world and seeing, for the first time, the subtle signature of the stars. A city is a story a civilization tells about its place in the universe. Before the first foundation stone was ever laid, before any discussion of drainage or defense, there was a prior conversation, a silent debate about the nature of reality itself. This was the Cosmological Code, the original and most powerful urban planning manual ever written. It was not inscribed on clay or papyrus, but held in the collective mind of a culture, a deep-seated understanding of how the cosmos was structured, where the gods resided, and humanity's role within that grand design. This shared belief system was the invisible template placed over every blank slate of land. It answered the most fundamental questions of civic design. Where should our main avenue point? Toward the rising sun on the solstice, because that marks the rebirth of celestial power. What shape should our central plaza be? A circle, to mirror the dome of heaven, or a square, to symbolize the stable earth? How do we arrange our temples? In a pattern that mirrors the constellation our ancestors emerged from. This code provided a ready-made answer for every architectural decision, ensuring that the resulting city was not just a collection of buildings, but a coherent, three-dimensional model of a worldview. The power of this approach was its universality and its legitimacy. A king who built his capital as a reflection of the celestial order was not merely exercising power. He was demonstrating that his rule was itself a natural extension of cosmic law. His authority flowed from the same source as the sunrise and the star paths. This granted a stability and a sacred purpose that mere military strength or wealth could never provide. The city became proof of a divine covenant. This is why the figure of the architect was so often shrouded in mystery or elevated to myth. In societies operating under this cosmological code, the individual designer was not the source of the blueprint. They were merely its most skilled interpreter. Their genius lay in their ability to translate abstract cosmic principles, the movement of planets, the harmony of spheres, the hierarchy of the heavens, into the practical language of brick, mortar, and surveyed lines. They were a mediator, a bridge between the intangible order of the universe and the tangible needs of a community. To single out such a person for individual glory could actually undermine the very message of the city, which was that the design came from a higher, impersonal source. So their names faded, absorbed into the collective achievement or attributed to gods and mythical heroes like Daedalus, or the city itself was the lasting monument, and its enduring harmony was the only signature the true architect ever needed. We see this unifying thread everywhere. The Egyptian temple complex, aligned to the Nile's flow and the circumpolar stars, was a machine for maintaining the cosmic order. The Chinese capital, with its grid mirroring the purple forbidden enclosure of the sky, was an administrative chart of heavenly bureaucracy. The ceremonial center, with its pyramids marking solar and planetary cycles, was a massive stone calendar ensuring the continuation of time. These are not disconnected curiosities. They are regional dialects of the same fundamental language. The specific constellations might change, the preferred geometric shapes might differ, but the underlying grammar was identical: build as the heavens are built, and you will create a place of lasting power and meaning. This cosmological code was the ultimate source of resilience. When a city built on trade routes might falter from an economic shift, or a fortress city might fall to a stronger army, a city built on cosmic principles carried a different kind of strength. Its meaning was rooted not in the transient affairs of men, but in the perceived eternal truths of the universe. Even in ruins, its alignments still function, catching the solstice sun as they have for, a silent testament to the first and most profound rule of urban design, that to build a home for humanity, you must first look up and understand your home in the stars. Their sketchbooks are filled with the ghosts of perfect geometry. In the 13th century, a master mason named Villard compiled a parchment portfolio of architectural wonders, from lifting machines to the precise schematics of Reims Cathedral. Yet for all its detail, the book is a tantalizing cipher, revealing the how but rarely the profound why behind the soaring stone. These men were the shadow architects of the Gothic age, the anonymous engineers behind the most ambitious vertical cities ever conceived. While their names, like Peer of Dame Paris, sometimes survive in ledgers, their deepest cosmological vision is encoded in the silent language of the cathedrals themselves. The common explanation is that these structures were built solely for the glory of God, and this is true, but for the master mason, God's glory was inseparable from the mathematical perfection of his universe. Their genius lay in building a theology of light and number, where every vault, every window, was a calculated point in a celestial equation. Consider the labyrinth set into the floor of Chartres Cathedral, a winding path pilgrims would walk on their knees. Its position is not arbitrary. On the summer solstice, a shaft of sunlight falls through a specific high window, striking a single stone in the labyrinth's center. This is not a happy accident. It is a meticulously engineered moment of celestial alignment, a solar signature embedded in the sacred geometry of the floor. The master mason who designed this was doing more than creating a meditation aid. He was synchronizing the house of God with the turning of God's own sun, making the cosmos a participant in the ritual. This principle extends to the very bones of the building. The seemingly miraculous height of the nave, achieved through flying buttresses, was governed by strict proportional ratios. Many scholars believe the builders used systems derived from sacred geometry, like the golden ratio or the square root of 2, to determine the relationships between a chapel's width, the height of its arches, and the span of its vaults. These ratios were not chosen for aesthetic whim. They were believed to reflect the harmonic proportions through which the divine intelligence had constructed creation itself. To build with these ratios was to make the cathedral a microcosm of a perfectly ordered universe. The most breathtaking inscriptions of this cosmic code are the rose windows. These massive, circular stained glass marvels are often described as symbolic wheels of fortune or divine majesty. But look closer. Their intricate stone tracery divides the circle into precise geometric segments, often based on the number 12 or its multiples, echoing the 12 months of the solar year and the 12 signs of the zodiac, which medieval scholars understood as part of God's celestial clockwork. The placement of these windows is also significant. At Chartres, the north rose window is dedicated to the Virgin Mary and is associated with the cooler, bluer light of that direction, often linked in medieval thought with the Old Testament and the promise of a Messiah foretold in the stars. The south rose, bathed in the warm, direct light of the sun, celebrates Christ and the apostles, the fulfilled light of the world. This is not mere symbolism. It is a full integration of cosmic direction, celestial light, and theological narrative into the architectural fabric. Beneath the soaring heights, the crypt holds another layer of the mystery. Many cathedrals were built upon older, sacred sites, and their crypts often preserve the exact footprint and alignment of the previous church. The master mason, in designing the new, grander structure, had to incorporate and honor this existing sacred axis, which itself might have been aligned to a solstice sunrise or a significant star from a much older tradition. His work was thus a palimpsest, layering new celestial mathematics over old cosmic alignments, creating a continuity of sacred space across centuries. The knowledge to perform this synthesis was not held in universities, but in the closed, secretive world of the Masons' lodges. Through initiatory rites and hands-on apprenticeship, masters passed down not just techniques for cutting stone, but the esoteric principles of sacred geometry and cosmic correspondence. Villard's sketchbook, with its mix of practical diagrams and enigmatic drawings of lions and church plans, hints at this dual education, blending the craft of the hand with the philosophy of the cosmos. So who were these shadow architects? They were philosopher-engineers, men who saw no division between the spiritual and the scientific. When Pierre calculated the thrust of a flying buttress, he was solving a physics problem to achieve a theological goal, to raise a vessel of light so high it seemed to touch the firmament. Their anonymity was partly a function of their era, where the collective work of the guild was paramount, and the glory was meant for God and the church that commissioned them. But it also speaks to their self-perception. They were not artists seeking individual fame. They were humble builders participating in the greatest possible project, the literal reconstruction of heavenly Jerusalem on earth, using the only blueprint they believed was infallible, the mathematical and celestial order of the created world. Their legacy is not a name on a plaque, but the cold, precise moment every summer solstice when a beam of ancient sunlight finds its mark on a cathedral floor, a silent testament to minds that sought to build heaven's own order into the very stone. The silent stones of these ancient cities ask us a quiet, urgent question. What story is our own landscape telling? The forgotten architects left behind more than ruins. They left a philosophy of place, a master class in how to build a world that means something. Their central, enduring lesson is this: the most powerful human spaces are not the most efficient or the most profitable. They are the ones that weave us into a larger tapestry. They connect us upward to the cosmos through solstice light and stellar alignments, outward to the natural world through sacred geography and reverence for land, inward to community through shared ritual paths, and backward and forward through time by honoring ancestors and building for generations yet unborn. In a single, perfectly oriented street, they achieved all of this at once. Their work stands in stark contrast to so much of our contemporary built environment: the anonymous sprawl of suburbs that look the same in every time zone, the glass towers that prioritize isolated views over communal experience, the commercial centers designed solely for transaction rather than transformation. This is not an indictment of modernity, but a call to remember a choice. The forgotten architects prove that placemaking can be a profound, intentional act of world building. Every decision, from the angle of a boulevard to the placement of a public square, is a statement of values. It answers the question, what matters most to us here? For them, the answer was cosmic harmony and sacred order. So we must now ask, what is the cosmology of our 21st century city? What unseen blueprint guides our planners? Too often, the dominant forces are raw economics and logistical efficiency, a cosmology of the spreadsheet and the traffic model. These are necessary, of course, but they are insufficient for the human spirit. The legacy of the celestial blueprint invites us to expand that vision. Could our new cosmology be one of ecological sustainability, where cities are designed as symbiotic partners with their local ecosystems, channeling sunlight and rain not as nuisances, but as sacred resources? Could it be community well-being, where neighborhoods are laid out to foster chance encounters, support multi-generational living, and create spaces for collective joy and mourning? Could it be a re-enchantment with the natural world, where every child can see the stars at night and track the seasons by the light in their own park? This is not about building pyramids to planets, but about rediscovering the intention behind the alignment. It is about designing with purpose and poetry. It means considering how the morning sun will fall on a playground, how the winter wind will be channeled or calmed by a building's curve, how a network of paths can encourage walking and conversation rather than isolation in metal boxes. It asks us to be architects of experience, not just of structures. The true invitation these forgotten visionaries extend across the centuries is to become mindful builders once more, whether we are planning a metropolis or simply arranging our own garden. They remind us that we are always in dialogue with the sky, the earth, and each other through the spaces we create. To build with that awareness is to honor their deepest lesson, that a city is never just a place to live. It is a story we tell about who we are and who we hope to become under the vast and watching sky. From the silent avenues to the sung pathways of Australia, we have traversed the globe in search of architects who looked up to design down. Their names are lost, but their celestial signatures are etched permanently into the earth. These forgotten masters understood that a city is more than bricks and mortar. It is a statement of belief, a prayer in stone, a mirror held up to the stars. As we look at our own urban environments, let us remember this hidden layer of meaning. The sprawling suburbs and towering downtowns we inhabit today were also built from a blueprint, a set of beliefs about efficiency, growth, and the individual. The question is not whether our spaces have meaning, but what that meaning is. Do they connect us or isolate us? Do they inspire awe or merely convenience? The legacy of the star-aligned cities invites us to ask these questions, to look at the layout of our own neighborhoods and consider the story they are telling. Perhaps we can find small ways to reintroduce that ancient sense of connection by preserving to the horizon, creating public plazas that catch the evening light, or simply planting a tree whose shadow traces the path of the sun across the grass. We may not build capitals for kings or temples for oracles, but we still build worlds every day. Each community garden, each thoughtfully placed bench, each park that allows a view of the night sky is a step toward re-enchanting our shared space. It is an acknowledgement that we, too, belong to a grander order. If this journey has reshaped how you see the world beneath your feet, we would love to hear your thoughts. Have you noticed an unusual alignment in your own town? Does an old street seem to point directly at the rising sun? Share your discoveries in the comments below and subscribe to keep exploring history's deepest mysteries with us. The next time you walk a straight street or stand in an open square, look up. The architects may be forgotten, but their greatest lesson remains, written in the dialogue between the ground we shape and the endless sky.